This is East Branch of Clarion River Lake, October 7th, 2023.
of Latter-day Saints, a plan which would inspire the Mormons' eventual spiritual home in the Salt Lake Valley. Have you been in the Temple Square before?
Yeah, I was here yesterday walking around. Got to see some of the sights.
So we don't have to point out which is the tabernacle, which is the temple.
Feel free to. Thanks for the radio.
Showing Sam around Temple Square is Keith Erickson, director of the LDS Church History Library. Accompanying them is Emily Utt, historic sites curator for the LDS Church.
See, I could go on for about 3 weeks about Temple Square.
Keith and Emily took Sam to the LDS Church History Museum.
So we'll just kind of through the exhibit and find it. The plan itself is over here. This is it.
This is the original
This is what they described and named the Plat of Zion.
The three of us are gathered around a display case in the museum that's actually pretty easy to just walk right past.
I actually think that this is the significance of what's in it. It's just a rough-hewn, it's designed to look like a rough-hewn wood box.
Inside, under thick museum glass, is a large piece of parchment with Joseph Smith's urban plan for an American city of God.
The temple blocks in the middle are kind of this ochre, kind of red color, and then the streets are labeled in a kind of light green.
The document we're all looking at, the Plat of Zion, is a city plan, a series of squares divided up by horizontal and vertical lines. It is one of the first documents that the Mormon prophet Joseph Smith and his scribes produced.
It's a pretty simple system. Very large blocks, 660 feet on each side, all forming right angles with one another. All of them the same, except for these special blocks in the middle, which he imagined would hold 24 temples.
The city's grid was designed so that you would always know exactly how far you were from its spiritual center.
I see this definitely as divinely inspired. These are coming from a man who had never seen a big city, who had probably never heard of city planning, and was really looking at this as the basis of a revelation to understand how the kingdom of God looks when it hits the earth.
This Zionic city that Joseph Smith imagined would be as big as New York or Philadelphia or Boston were at the time. It would be an attempt to harness the best things a city could offer: infrastructure, education, community. But without Smith sought to achieve this by giving people lots of space.
It would effectively be a rural city. Within the large blocks, each church member would have a plot of land to have fruit trees and vegetable gardens. And Joseph Smith imagined the essential piece of the urban fabric would be the home.
Again, Dr. Benjamin Park.
I think he would have rejected the general separation of commercial and domestic living. You would go to a shop that's based out of someone's home.
But Smith never got to experience mixed-use, walkable, everything artisanally crafted utopian community.
After leading his converts to Ohio, and then Missouri, and then Illinois, and clashing violently with locals pretty much everywhere they went, Joseph Smith was killed by an angry anti-Mormon mob in 1844.
The leadership of the LDS Church fell to a member of Smith's inner circle, a man named Brigham Young.
Brigham Young leads a large number of the church out west to what was then Mexican territory.
After a journey spanning years, the Mormons entered the Salt Lake Valley in 1847 and established Salt Lake City.
It would be the first place that they could build exactly as they wanted. And when Brigham Young began devising a plan for what they would build, he returned to Joseph Smith's Plat of Zion.
Brigham Young's plan does look a bit like Joseph Smith's Plat of Zion, but with more detail and some changes.
I see this utopian idea hitting some problems when you have to start dealing with actual landscape.
That's Emily Hutt again with the LDS Church. Brigham Young realized quickly that the Plat of Zion wouldn't work in the real world without some modifications. Smith's plan called for 24 temples at the center of the city. Young decided to start with one. Brigham Young also realized that the city couldn't survive on cottage industries alone. They would also need some commercial and industrial districts.
There were limits to the rural city idea, and the mountainous terrain of the Salt Lake Valley didn't lend itself to a regular, rigid grid.
But in many ways, Brigham Young's plan for Salt Lake City is faithful to the Plat of Zion. The city is still, after all, built around a temple square, and with streets named in a way that tell you exactly how far you are from it at all times. And the orderliness of the grid dovetails with Mormon sensibilities about the spiritual importance of maintaining a tidy home.
Brigham Young and his fellow Mormons did not stop in Salt Lake City. Over the next half-century, they built about 700 towns based on a similar plan all over Utah. And in many of these towns, they kept Joseph Smith's prescription for large city blocks, 660 feet on each side, with wide streets between them.
The joke is you could turn a wagon around in the middle of the block.
Actually, one version of the joke I heard is that the streets are wide enough to be able to turn a wagon around without the drivers resorting to cursing.
Knowing Mormons, that's probably very true.
In Salt Lake City, the wide streets and huge blocks have the effect of making you feel kind of small.
And they say that everything is bigger in Texas. I just don't think those people have been to Utah before.
This is Molly O'Neill Robinson, urban designer for the Salt Lake City government. We're walking around downtown Salt Lake, and she's showing me just how wide streets can feel for pedestrians.
We're crossing the street right now. We're crossing A 132-foot right-of-way.
The blinking pedestrian sign gives us less than half a minute to cross 6 lanes of traffic.
We're walking at a normal pace, not enough time to cross.
Many, if not most, streets in Salt Lake City, even streets in the heart of downtown, are 4 or 6 lanes wide. All because the plat of Zion called for streets with a width of 132 feet.
Back in the day, things were platted and measured using the surveyor's chain. The surveyor's chain is 66 feet, also known as 1 furlong. The width of our street is 2 furlongs, and that was 232 feet.
The streets are so menacing to cross that the city tried making them safer by offering pedestrians bright orange flags.
So basically, the lamppost, there is a bucket that takes you to it, kind of a plastic. And there's like 1, 2, 3 big.
You're supposed to pick up a flag and carry the flag with you as you cross the street for added visibility.
Can we do it?
We should, and I'm gonna make you do it.
You're embarrassed?
No, I refuse to carry a flag.
Alright, so we're crossing now. I'm waving this flag.
I've seen these crossing flags in other places. My neighborhood actually has them at the intersections near the elementary school. But it does seem kind of absurd to ask people to carry bright orange flags in the downtown of a large American city.
We made it across. I'm gonna drop this in the bucket. So you refuse to carry these?
So I refuse to carry the flag on principle. And then I believe that our streets should be designed to inherently make pedestrian crossing safe. And if you have to carry a flag across the street to get someone to notice you, then we haven't designed the street safely.
And difficulty crossing the street is not the only problem with large blocks. Urban planners have long known that short blocks are inherently more interesting because there's a good network nodes, or sites of possible interaction between blocks. Shorter blocks need more intersections, and more intersections need more options for what to do or where to go.
Given the problems that large blocks and wide streets have created in Salt Lake, you might get the idea that Salt Lake started out with a bad plan.
No. Oh no. What you're seeing there is a complete misunderstanding of Brigham Young's concept.
That's Andre Stuani, a partner with the architecture firm DPZ. He's also one of the founders of the new urbanist movement to make cities and suburbs less car-oriented, more walkable, and more environmentally friendly. Andre Stuani says that in Brigham Young's original plan, the streets were never supposed to be paved from curb to curb. The streets were basically green space, with pavement only in the parts where settlers wanted the ox carts to go.
And Brigham Young never imagined that the huge blocks originally meant for farming would remain intact as the city evolved.
He understood that the blocks would have to be subdivided from agricultural to urban over time.
For Stuani, the Salt Lake City we have today represents the stagnation of Brigham Young's dreams.
So Salt Lake City went from most beautiful to actually one of the most hostile in the West. And that's a misunderstanding of the intention of Brigham Young and the Plat of Zion.
Making the city less hostile to pedestrians is exactly what anti-orange flag Molly O'Neill Robinson is trying to do. She wants to take those huge blocks, break them down into more walkable sections, and make them more interesting.
You know, that there's something kind of engaging and delighting your eye as you're moving along.
Molly is hoping to do this block by block in Salt Lake City. She took Sam to one current project on Regent Street, where they're working on getting more pedestrian life into the middle of the block.
So Regent Street is really the first pedestrian first street in Salt Lake.
So the street has always been here, but you're kind of redesigning the streets.
Yes.
Regent Street used to just be an access road for some downtown parking structures. Now it's a pedestrian walkway that opens up
Otherwise known as a parking garage.
New restaurant space.
The idea with the street is that we will be able to close down portions of the street for festivals and events, big theater openings, things like that.
Regent Street is still under construction, but even so, people are already drawn to walk through it.
The stakes for creating a denser, more walkable Salt Lake are high. Even though the city feels wide open and nature is easily accessible, Salt Lake suffers from some of the worst air pollution in the country. The mountain ranges around the city trap in all the smog, which largely comes from cars.
What's more, Salt Lake is expected to double in population by 2050, and it can't expand its city limits because of geographic boundaries, like mountains, like Great Big Salty Lake. The city's ability to thrive will be determined by its ability to make more efficient use of the space it already has.
There's a lot of optimism in the city for finding better ways to use its large blocks and streets. And there's been some progress. But several developers told me that the new city administration has not been kind to these approaches. They seem to be more about keeping Salt Lake City as it is.
In the Church of Latter-day Saints, there's a principle called continuous revelation, that God is still speaking, and that divine truths are still being revealed. And so maybe what Salt Lake City needs, maybe what all Americans need, is a kind of continuous revelation, a way of honoring the principles on which the city was founded, but with the understanding that they must adapt, respond to the demands of the present. Through the settled systems, exploring over 1,000 planets while unraveling humanity's greatest mystery. For all, into the Starfield. Visit www.starfieldgame.com to learn more and pre-order. Rated M for mature. The falling leaves and chill in the air can only mean one thing. Football is back. Whole Foods Market has got everything you need for a delicious tailgate or watch party. Level up game day hosting with animal welfare certified meat. We're talking marinated chicken wings, organic chicken sausages, hot dogs, and more. If you really want to step it up, catering makes tailgates a breeze. Explore the Whole Foods Market catering menu at shop.wfm.com. Don't sleep on the build your own taco bar. I mean, if you showed up at a place named Taco Bar, you would just be so excited. If you're heading over to a friend's house, bring snacks from Whole Foods Market like late July tortilla chips, Primal Kitchen queso dip, or buffalo sauce, beef jerky, cheese, pickles, or salted nuts. Grab football-ready sides.
Yeah, the shorter way to refer to it is LIGO. And scientists working on that experiment detected a signal from space that they turned into a sound. So I'm going to play the sound for you.
So am I listening for the one that's going?
Yeah. Whoop, whoop.
So what's that sound mean?
That sound is the sound of two black holes colliding and unleashing the energy of 1,000,000 trillion suns. And it doesn't actually sound like much, and that's because the black holes collided 1 billion years ago. And so the sound has been traveling through space for all of those years, getting fainter and fainter as it goes. And by the time it actually reached us here on Earth, it was just that little whoop, whoop. But the scientists amazingly heard it.
Okay, so why is it so amazing?
Because it is the first direct evidence of gravitational waves, which are basically ripples in space-time. And gravitational waves were predicted more than 100 years ago by Einstein in his theory of general relativity. And that theory totally reimagined the rules of physics. So basically, instead of a static framework, Einstein had this theory that matter and energy could actually distort the geometry of the universe and create these ripples of gravity. And so he had theorized that gravitational waves exist, but this sound was the first evidence that they're real. And so it basically was evidence that this wild theory that Einstein had, that had been mathematically proven, it was like the first physical evidence.
Wow, that is
Yeah, it was kind of mind-blowing. And the discovery generated a ton of news, obviously. But as Carrie, our listener, wrote in to point out, there's a design angle.
Oh, I'm always in favor of design angles.
It's design. So what she was interested in and what she said you should really look at is the instrument, the machine that detected the sound is amazing and extremely sensitive. You know, it would have to be sensitive in order to pick up a sound that's been traveling through space from all that outside noise. And then on top of that, the experiment employed two people who were environmental monitors. So their job was to figure out how environmental sound might interfere with the experiment. And Carrie actually talked to the guy who ran the experiment, Dr. Dave Wrightsey. He's the head of LIGO, and here he is.
They do tests. So they'll put speakers in the vacuum tank, near the vacuum tanks, and you can play your favorite symphony, and then you measure its effect.
Yeah, so they played these recordings. They did stuff like play recordings of howling wolves. And they even had a staff member ride away on his Harley to record the effect that the rumbling motor had on the experiment.
There's a great entry by the team that was doing the environmental monitoring saying, Bubba rides off in a motorcycle. Bubba's one of our facility managers at Hanford, and he was doing a test for them.
And so over time, they generated this huge library of what different kinds of sonic interference might do to the experiment. And so when the genuine signal appeared, they would know that it wasn't just environmental noise. Like, how crazy it is that they were able to detect this sound. And the other crazy thing is they detected it, like, right after they turned the experiment on. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, so fast that they thought it must be a mistake.
But it wasn't a mistake. This is one of the biggest scientific discoveries ever.
Yeah. And I really love this kind of science story or this detail about sort of the process of science and just all the mundane, everyday stuff that can get in the way of that grand, magnificent discovery.
That's so cool. So we should thank Carrie for her story.
Yes. So thank you, Dr. Carrie Nugent. She's one of our listeners. And she did a whole interview with Dr. Dave Wrightsey, who's the head of LIGO. It's on her podcast. It's called Space Pod. And she just knows so much more about this stuff than I do.
So that was Mini Stories Volume 1 and the final episode of 2016. I interviewed all of the 99PI producers for this project, so you'll hear the rest of the crew on the first episode of 2017. In the meantime, we're all going to take some time off, but I would also like to use this time to collect a few mini story suggestions from you, listeners, kind of like the concrete narrative thing that I can talk about in between the stories. Katie, Sharif, and Avery on Mini Stories Volume 2. So get in touch via the contact page on our website at 99pi.org or on Twitter at Mars or at 99pi.org, or you can comment on the Facebook post for this episode. If you are sad that you will not have a new 99% Invisible episode episodes in the next couple of weeks. Go download a bunch of the old ones. We almost never run repeats, but they're all there in the feed just waiting for you. Most of you probably haven't heard everything, and if you have heard everything, you probably won't remember everything. I barely remember them, and I was there when we made them. So just go download every one. I hope you have some good time off coming your way, and I'll talk to you next year. 99% Invisible is Katie Minkle, Delaney Hall, Kurt Kolstad, Sharif Youssef, Sam Greenspan, Avery Troubleman, Emmett Fitzgerald, Taryn Mazza, and me, Roman Mars. We are a project of 91.7 KALW San Francisco and produced on Radio Row in beautiful downtown Oakland, California. This episode is brought to you by Starfield. Embark on an epic journey through the stars in Bethesda Game Studios' first new universe in over 25 years. In this next stop, the most important story is the one that you tell. Captain your own ship as you venture through the settled systems, exploring over 1,000 planets while unraveling humanity's greatest mystery. For all, into the Starfield. Visit www.starfieldgame.com to learn more and pre-order. Rated M for mature. You can find the show and join discussions about the show on Facebook. Tweet me at Roman Mars and the show at 99pi.org. We're on Instagram and Tumblr too. You won't really understand the show until you spend some time. And then So back when I first had my twin boys, Maslow and Carver, huge chunks of my days were spent pushing them around the hills of the Bay with a giant double stroller, listening to podcasts. So this is in early 2008, and that's when I discovered my first true love in podcasting, The Bugle, audio newspaper for a visual world. It was one of the most popular comedy podcasts in the world, presented by Andy Zoltzman and John Oliver, who at the time was newly at The Daily Show. After it finished its run at the Times Online, it went independent, and I donated my own money to keep it going. It went fallow for a bit, while both John and Andy got busy with other things. And a while ago, I heard from Andy's sister, Radiotopia's own Helen Zoltzman, that Andy was looking to make his primary focus again. And I'm incredibly excited that it's now part of Radiotopia, with Andy and a rotating set of co-hosts, including Wyatt Snack, Ish Kumar, and my favorite, Helen Zoltzman. With everything going on in the world, I'm just really excited that we have a hilarious news satire program with a global perspective that can react to what's going on. So please welcome them to Radiotopia and subscribe to The View. Radiotopia. Apple Card is the perfect credit card for every purchase. Receive it daily and get rewarded 4.15% annual percentage yield when you open a high-yield savings account. Apply for Apple Card in the Wallet app on iPhone and start earning and growing your daily cash with savings today. Apple Card subject to credit approval. Savings is available to Apple Card owners subject to eligibility requirements. Savings account provided by Goldman Sachs Bank USA. Member FDIC. Terms apply. New immune-supporting emergency crystals bring in the goodness of emergency and a fun new coffee experience. There's no water needed, so it's super convenient. From a back to house. Feel the pop, hear the fizz, and taste the delicious natural fruit flavors. Emergency crystals, orange vitality, and strawberry burst flavors for ages 9 and up have 500 milligrams of vitamin C for sleep food. Look for emergency crystals wherever you shop. These statements have not been evaluated by the Food and Drug Administration. This product is not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease. Every kid learns differently, so it's really important that your children have the educational support that they need to help them keep up and excel. If your child needs homework help, check out IXL, the online learning platform for kids. IXL covers math, language arts, science, and social studies through interactive practice problems from pre-K to 12th grade. As kids practice, they get positive feedback and even awards. With the school year ramping up, now is the best time to get IXL. Our listeners can get an exclusive 20% off IXL membership when they sign up today at IXL.com/invisible. That's the letters IXL.com/invisible. This is 99% Invisible. I'm Roman Mars. This is from Twitter. Hey, Roman Mars and 99pi.org. I have a burning question for you. Why do U.S. flags on military vehicles in uniforms always appear backwards? That's from Michael McCollum. Well, first of all, they're only backwards part of the time. Military regulations state that when a flag is displayed, it must give the effect of that flag flying in the breeze as if the person wearing it is moving forward. So if the patch is on the left arm, the flag is displayed as you normally think of it, with that blue star field in the upper left-hand corner. But if the flag patch is on the right arm, it's the reverse side flag that's displayed, with the blue star field in the upper right-hand corner. The same goes for vehicles. The blue star field always points towards the front of the vehicle, as if it's flying or charging forward to victory. So if you're looking at the right side of a tank or an airplane, stories that don't quite fill out an entire episode for whatever reason, but they are cool 99 PI stories nonetheless. Plus, in between the staff stories, I'll be telling a few mini stories suggested by you beautiful viewers who enjoy having me paraphrase Google search results and read them out loud. Alright, up first, the senior editor, Katie Mingle.
My name is Katie Mingle, and I am the senior editor.
What does that mean?
I do the same stuff that we all do in some ways, which is like find stories and report on them and make them, but I also edit a lot. So I look at other people's stories on paper before they go to like a larger group edit, and I cut like 5 pages out of every story. No, I probably cut like 4 minutes and sometimes do some restructuring and just kind of try to get it ready.
Right.
So that it's a little more smooth when the whole group looks at it.
And so even though we don't hear your voice in every story, you have worked on every story because you've edited almost every story that comes out of you.
Yes, I'm lurking behind every 99 PI story.
Cool. Okay, so but in addition to that, you do pitch stories, and so part of coming up with story ideas is basically just trolling around the internet, trying to find things to turn
I'm just like following links. That's sort of like how this one came about, and I ended up on this YouTube video about this place called the Biker Wall, which is in Newcastle, England, and it's being narrated by this woman wearing this amazing sort of double-breasted suit jacket, and she's just super 80s. Her name's Beatrix Campbell. In the video, she's sort of walking around outside the Biker Wall, or the Biker Estate.
It's big and it's small. It's cheap and cheerful. It's cheeky. And it's clever.
I don't really know how it's big and small, but and I'm not sure that we ever really figure that out. So the structure or the sort of estate that she's talking about, it actually replaced an entire 17,000 resident working class neighborhood called Biker, the same name as this new place, was demolished because it was considered a slum. I think there were a lot of vacancies. And the neighborhood was made up of sort of Victorian row housing, and like if you've ever seen the movie Billy Elliot, and you can like picture him sort of dancing through these like brick houses and really close together narrow streets. That's
Biker. That's the old Biker.
That's the old Biker, and I think that movie was actually filmed really close to the old Biker neighborhood.
Street by street, the old slums were cleared, while street by street, the new Biker was built.
So yeah, in place of the old neighborhood of brick row houses, this architect named Ralph Erskine built the new place, which is called Biker Wall. And it's a community of public housing that is enclosed by this great big wall of apartments. The wall is 1.5 miles long, and it provides a barrier to winds coming kind of off the North Sea, and also highway noise. There's like a big freeway or expressway nearby, and it kind of creates this sort of microclimate within the community. So it's basically this big wall that sort of wraps around these other buildings. And you like vivid descriptions, but she says the way it's constructed and laid out kind of reminds her of a pomegranate.
It's kind of like a pomegranate. It's fruity, hard edges, and soft, sweet places inside.
Yeah. And if you're feeling like at all like that was a little sexual, it gets like there's more.
But what does all this mean for architecture? Is it modernist or postmodernist or what? For sure, it abolishes aggressive phallic architecture, all those grey erections which puncture the skyline. Maybe it's vulval architecture. It's round, it goes with the contours of the landscape. It's an enclosure rather than a disclosure, full of nooks and crannies, layers and levels and surprises.
Woo. Nooks and crannies.
Oh my god.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, if you didn't hear that, it demolishes aggressive phallic architecture and those gray erections that puncture the skyline
Yeah.
for a vulval architecture.
Those gray erections.
Oh, that's so great.
Found this place and I was sort of like, I want to put this on the air basically just to get this lady and her vulval architecture theories on our podcast. Like, I don't know if there's a story here, but I want there to be.
But there are little cool things about bikers. So
There's actually a lot
Yeah.
that's kind of neat about it. Ralph Erskine, the architect, he was a socialist and a Quaker, and he really wanted to build a place that fostered community. And he'd also studied buildings in the Arctic and how they were constructed to sort of shield the inner courtyards from winds coming in from the outside. And he wanted to do something similar, but not just to shield it from winds, but also just to enclose the residents in this vulvic community. And Erskine tried really, really hard to involve a bunch of the residents from the old biker in the redesign of the new one. But despite his sort of best efforts, not that many of the original residents ended up living there. And eventually in the 80s, the place kind of turns a little bit back into a slum, vacancies, and a lot of the places sort of fall into disrepair. The Guardian said this about the new biker estate. For all its faults, Biker Wall was an exemplar of both design and an attempt to involve the community in the changes planned for them by those in power. That it failed in so many ways reveals that it's rarely in the interests of communities to demolish the homes they live in. Yeah, so that's, to me, that's just sort of like, you can try really hard to do it right, and it still might come out wrong.
Right.
So, and Beatrix Campbell, the YouTube lady, she admits that the place is flawed, but she still thinks it's pretty great.
It's flawed, of course, but at least, unlike most of its contemporaries, there's a bit of democracy here. It's both monumental and modest. It's a social space and domestic. There's something light-hearted about this place. Something lovable.
Okay, so I don't know if you could understand her last line there, but she says there's something lighthearted about this place, something lovable. And then I love that if you scroll down just a little ways, that the comment on the video says they didn't tell them it was Carl Orff 24/7 in this place. And Carl Orff, I think what that comment is getting at is that it was really kind of a dark place to live, because Carl Orff wrote this tune.
That's pretty dark.
It's the Biker Wall.
Cool. Thank you, Katie.
Yeah.
Multi-million-dollar revamp of the Biker Wall with lots of improvements, including broadband in every property. So I hope it's not all Carl Orff up there anymore, if indeed it ever was.
Tell me who you are.
I am Sharif Yusuf, assistant producer at 99PI.
And what is that? What do you do?
I sort of do a lot of the Pro Tools stuff, so working with the actual tape for a lot of the producer's stories. I score and sound design a lot of the pieces. I do research and fact checking, so I basically do whatever needs to be done.
And so what is your mini story?
So things that are creative are relatively simple to copyright. You write a song, copyright. You write a book, it's easy to get copyright, and it's easy to prove that you've done this thing. But a question arises when you try to copyright something that is based in fact, some sort of objective reality, like the definition of a word in dictionaries, or an entry for a person in an encyclopedia. Or, in this case, maps, and I know you like a good map story.
Oh, I love a good map story.
Yeah, so this story is about a town called Agloe, New York. And it was in the 1930s. The General Drafting Company was creating a map of New York State. So they put in a lot of hours and a lot of manpower, detailing all the rivers and gorges and finger lakes and towns. And they said, we put in so much work, you know, we have to protect our investment. So they set a copyright trap near the northwest corner of Pennsylvania, just a couple miles into New York. They put a little town next to Roscoe, New York, called Agloe. And Agloe, I believe, is actually a jumble of the initials of the founders' names, A-G-L-O-E.
And so they put this on the map, and they know that if another map shows Agloe, New York, that person was copying their map.
Yeah, exactly. So they create this fictitious town. It's on the map. And it's like sold in Esso stations around the state. And for a while, everything is all hunky-dory. But then, several years later, another map comes out. And they open the map, and lo and behold, Agloe was on it. This company was called Rand McNally Drafting Company. Busted. Yeah, that's what they thought. So the General Drafting Company goes, yo, Rand McNally, you stole our map and we're going to sue you. And Rand McNally is like, no, wait, this is an actual place. Let's go and take a look. And so the General Drafting Company people are like, okay, sure, take us to Agloe. So they go to this place where Agloe should be. And lo and behold, there is actually a big general store there, a small general store actually, and it's called the Agloe General Store. And there are a couple houses, maybe two at its peak. So the story goes, some people maybe from the neighboring towns wandered to this place, wanted to build a general store, saw that the map said Agloe is here, but nothing was there. So when they wanted to build the store, they just slapped on the Agloe name. So this place that was created as a fictitious copyright trap sort of sprang up into reality. So this sort of became famous because this author, John called Paper Towns, that is set in Agloe, New York. And he gave a TEDx talk about Agloe, New York, and about the concept of paper towns as well. And it was since turned into a movie.
So we thought this story might not be a great fit for us because people in our audience might already be really familiar with them.
Yeah.
But we can talk about it a little bit, and if you want to learn more, you should look up John Green because he and his brother Hank make these great videos. You learn all kinds of things. I know people who like this show will totally love what they do on YouTube, so check them out. And you are...
I'm Kurt Kolstad, and I'm the digital director at 99% Invisible.
And describe what that means.
Sure, I produce web stories for the show, and I take care of all of our digital content.
So, several years ago, I remember being in the waiting room waiting for Maslow, who was in surgery. It all turned out fine. I got an email from a firefighter, and she said, do you know anything about Knox boxes? Which are these little invisible elements that you see everywhere in urban environments, but you probably never noticed them. So please tell us, what is a Knox box?
Yeah, a Knox box, in simple terms, is a rapid entry system. It allows emergency personnel to get into buildings quickly when there's a disaster going on. When there's a fire in your apartment building, and the fire department is trying to get in quickly, they show up, they open the Knox box, get out a key, and enter the building.
Wow.
So describe it like physically. So it's like a little box that's sort of up against a wall, like posted on a wall?
A Knox box will typically be found within a few feet of an entryway. It's at eye level. It's a black box usually with a little red on it, so it's easy to spot. So the fire department shows up, they grab a hold of this little box, and they use their master key to open it and enter the building.
So if there's a fire inside, they don't want to break in all the doors and windows. They just, if there's a key available, they can use it.
Right. In an emergency, they're not worried about, the property damage. Of course, that's a byproduct. But they're worried about injuring themselves, right? So if they have to break the glass door and jump through that glass door, that puts them at greater risk. It also takes more time to get into the building. This saves them time, reduces injury risk and just lets them in quickly.
And so how does the whole system work? So they have a master key that opens up all the Knox boxes?
Right. So their master key opens up all the Knox boxes for all the different buildings. And that means when they arrive at a building, they don't have to sort through a bunch of keys, figure out how they're going to get into that particular building. They just whip over one key, stick it in the Knox box, open it up, and inside of that, they will find whatever key they need to access that particular building.
Where does the name Knox come from?
Knox is a company that produces a lot of these boxes. And so technically, generically, you might call them a rapid entry system. But Knox makes so many of them that it has become an everyday sort of household name for these things. Knox box, like Kleenex.
Kleenex, exactly. Okay, cool. So like, if you are in any populated area, you will see a ton of these, right? Like, they're everywhere.
Yeah, you are surrounded by Knox boxes basically anywhere you go. You probably pass a dozen or so of these just walking down the street. So on every block of every city, you'll find some equivalent of a Knox box attached to the outside of the building. And once you start seeing these, you will see them everywhere. They are at eye level, they're made to be seen, and yet they're somehow strangely invisible until you start noticing them.
So cool.
This was one of those great examples of a short story that was just, it's an anecdote more than a story, so it made sense to just put it up on the web and call it good.
Right, and so we have tons of those. We have a whole website devoted to them at 99pi.org. Thanks to Nikki, former firefighter, for the Knox box suggestion all those years ago. Last week, I got this mini story suggestion from Tucson, Arizona resident Megan Phillips. In Tucson, roads running east-west are called street. Roads running north-south are called avenue. That all makes sense. But what is unique to Tucson is that any diagonal roads are called stravenue, a portmanteau of street and avenue. That is an official designation. It's not just slang. And I think that's pretty cool. When I got Megan's note, I was sitting next to famous portmanteau skeptic Helen Zaltzman of The Illusionist. That's Radiotopia's acclaimed word podcast. And I asked her what she thought. I know your general opinion for portmanteau is pretty negative.
I think that's unfair. I think where portmanteaus are useful is to express a concept for which you don't have a proper term, and it's related to concepts that you do already have terms for. However, in this case, I feel like the portmanteau is fixing a problem that doesn't really exist. And that problem is that the people of Tucson are just very much too dependent on things either being streets or avenues. And I come from Britain, which does not have such a binary road naming system. So you might get a street that is called a street, or a road, or an avenue, or a crescent, or a boulevard, or not even have a road term at all. And it could go in any direction. So live and let live, Tucson.
It's a very pro-design, pro-grid show. I'm sorry that you had to hear that, my nerds. But I assure you, Helen Zaltzman's The Illusionist is a fantastic podcast that will teach and entertain you about words and the strange consequences of language. But I won't have Helen planning my city, because grids rule.
Man, I'm so excited to... I was about to say I'm so excited to get this story out of my system, but honestly, I still think it would make a good story. I think everyone is wrong, and I think I'm right, and I want it to... I'm still holding up. Sorry, yeah.
Maybe there'd be a groundswell that they need to know the whole story at the end.
Maybe, or I'm just worried that people will hear it and be like, oh yeah, no, it doesn't work, which would mean I'm totally crazy.
Let's find out.
Yeah.
So tell me who you are.
I'm Avery Truffleman.
What do you do here?
I'm a producer at 99% Invisible.
Okay. So we're telling all the type of stories that we can't tell on the radio for various reasons. Maybe they were little parts of stories that got cut out because they were too confusing. Maybe they were, like a little too small to constitute like putting a whole episode about. But this one is different. Why is it different?
This was supposed to be my magnum opus. This was the one that got away. I mean, I made it like 2 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And so at the time, I was like, this is it. I was already planning out like the t-shirts we wear in the world. It is a poster we have all seen. It is a poster we have all been forced to see. It is.
Suspense.
this poster.
Can you read that line there?
DAO6. It is that pyramid arrangement of black letters on a white background. It has usually got a big E at the top, and each line of letters gets progressively smaller. It is the vision chart, and it has an official name.
What's the name?
It is called the Snellen chart, after the Dutch ophthalmologist Herman Snellen, who invented it in 1862.
Is there anything here?
EVOTZ2.
Are perfectly plain.
The way it works is that you read off the series of letters in each line, and if you get the majority right, you get to move to the next line. Then you pass. And I went to a bunch of ophthalmologists and I took this vision test a bunch of times. And according to Mira Lim, this very kind ophthalmologist who works up the street from us.
By convention, you always use the Snellen chart. This just works well. It's what everybody has.
And a big part of why the
You can easily display posts from your social profiles on your website or share new blogs or videos to social media. Automatically push website content to your favorite channels so your followers can share it too. Go to squarespace.com/invisible for a free trial, and when you're ready to launch, use the offer code INVISIBLE to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain.
This is 99% Invisible. I'm Roman Mars.
He's Roman Mars.
On January 3rd, 1979, two officers from the Los Angeles Police Department went to the home of Eula May Love, a 39-year-old African-American mother. The officers were there because of a dispute over an unpaid gas bill.
They had been called to her home by the gas company because she had hit the utilities bill collector with a shovel. Mrs. Love was overdue with her $69 payment.
The officers approached her, and the encounter quickly turned violent. Love allegedly threatened the officers with a knife.
They fired 12 times and killed her. Her neighbors in Watts couldn't believe it.
They could have subdued this lady without using the weapons that they used. They could have took her alive. Plain and simple, because it was two cops against one lady with a butcher knife.
Neither of the two officers involved were prosecuted for the killing.
That's George Lavender, a criminal justice reporter at KCRW in Los Angeles.
The shooting sparked protests and calls for the resignation of the chief of police.
In the months since, blacks and liberals have become intensely critical of what they charge is excessive use of force by the Los Angeles Police Department. The American Civil Liberties Union says that in the last 4 years, officers here have shot over 300 people, killing nearly half of them.
Even though police shootings had been happening for years, and of course still happening today, the killing of Eula Love received a lot of media attention. That put pressure on the department to respond. The Los Angeles Board of Police Commissioners recommended changes to training and the way shootings by officers were investigated.
And the killing also led the department to research non-lethal weapons to see if there was some alternative that might reduce the LAPD's reliance on guns.
We needed to find a way to control people. Was there something that we could do before we had to shoot them, before they had an opportunity to attack and get shot?
That's Greg Meyer. He's a retired captain with the LAPD, and in 1979, he was given the job of researching non-lethal weapons for the department.
And what we were looking for was something that was effective at subduing a person so that they could be handcuffed expeditiously without a big fight.
Meyer and the LAPD set out to find a new tool that they hoped would help avoid needless deaths and injuries. The police chief at the time, Darrell Gates, told the Los Angeles Times, quote, "What we need is that thing you used to see in Buck Rogers, that thing you used to zap them, freeze them, stop them."
Ever since the beginning of policing, officers have been looking for tools to subdue people that they they consider threatening. When police first started to patrol the streets of America's cities, many carried sticks.
In 19th century New York, cops actually had 2 sticks to choose from, a shorter stick for the day and a longer one for the nighttime, because it was thought that more dangerous criminals would come out after dark.
That bigger stick became known as the nightstick. It's gone by other names too, the billy club, truncheon, baton.
My husband, the post office created America.
That is author and historian Nancy Gallup. She wrote a book based on this revelation called, appropriately,
How the Post Office Created America. History.
Gallup argues that the post office didn't just create
What
an
is he
efficient
not
and
special?
inexpensive way to send a letter from Brooklyn, California instead of Canada. America was right. The post was put in place by the English language. It was mostly used as messages from England to America.
Once the mail landed from England into America, it would be circulated by someone called a post rider, just like it sounds, a man on a horse. There were no roads suitable for a wheel vehicle.
At the time, the colonies out of the eastern coast of New Jersey and Georgia were interested in each other.
The colonies were very fractious, disputatious siblings. They had very little to do with each other. They were clamoring for the attention of modern England.
All this started to change when rising fellow Benjamin Franklin became postmaster for the crown. As postmaster, Franklin was in charge of
Making sign over there?
adopting proper notation, and he was determined to improve American society.
He actually visited every colony. This is back when it was a real pain in the neck. Established mileposts and charged fairly to cover the distance a letter was going instead of just estimating it.
But as Franklin worked to improve the kind system, they began to see the colonies differently.
I believe that the process of going around and thinking about these 13 colonies as not just disconnected, but links in a chain, I think this started him thinking about ways that they could come together as a people.
In 1750, a meeting of the representatives of New York, Franklin proposed a plan for uniting the colonies.
He actually kind of sketched out a federal government where the colonies would elect their own representatives as opposed to having them appointed by the crown.
England didn't appreciate Franklin's ideas, and colonists weren't quite ready for them either. But 20 years later, notions about American self-governance were spread. Revolutionaries in the colonies needed a way to communicate about who they could
Second hand in
Because
my...
of the ground system, their letters would be intercepted and they'd be arrested.
In 1774, these American revolutionaries created their own system to communicate called the Constitutional Post. Before they fought the Revolution, they had a system of government. Before the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, Americans had the Post. The underground Constitutional Post was crucial in fomenting the Revolution, which gave America independence from England, but it was still a very limited system. There were fewer than 100 post offices in the entire country, and the system didn't serve that many people. It was basically a tool for political elites to communicate with each other. The founders wanted a better post, one that would serve all people in their infant nation and help them stay united under one flag.
These people who were already spreading over the Appalachians into the wild west of Ohio and Kentucky.
Founding father Benjamin Rush especially believed that the post office would play a crucial role in democracy.
He was obsessed with the idea that the post office
Welcome to
should
Russia.
circulate newspapers to every American. You couldn't have an educated electorate if the people weren't literate and they didn't have up-to-date medical information.
But this would be no small undertaking. They needed infrastructure, roads, and workforce.
This government had very little money. It was running on fumes. And yet he says we're going to have this very, very ambitious postal system, much more ambitious than anything in Europe. It's really kind of astounding.
In 1792, Congress passed the Post Office Act. Under the act, new postal routes were established. Censoring or stealing mail became a punishable offense, and all newspapers can be mailed at the same low rate to promote the spread of information. It set off a huge explosion of newspapers from all sorts of political viewpoints. The post office was the main way, sometimes the only way people got information. It was the media.
We were news junkies back then. The founders ensured that we would have an uncensored, lively, contentious political culture because they wanted the people to be exposed to all kinds of views and argue it out and then vote.
We've been arguing and gossiping and spreading information, not all of it true, since the very beginning.
In a way, you could take the attitude of they sort of created a Frankenstein, but in fact, it was by design.
Around the same time, in the late 1700s, The stagecoach was becoming a more popular way to travel and a better way to carry mail than just packing or riding on horse. The post office started to contract with carry mail. These companies worked with cities to build roads. In this way, the post helped carve out the early transportation infrastructure of the country, connecting disparate communities. When a group of people settled in a new place, the residents would petition the government for a post office, which gave them an address and a place on the map.
And then that town would be connected to another town down the road. We started to have this kind of network. It's developed not just our physical landscape with roads, but a social landscape. So you could start to talk about this huge country with like some locations.
In 1831, when the French diplomat and writer Alexis de Tocqueville toured America, he was amazed by our postal system.
He's riding in a stagecoach through someplace in the Michigan outback, and he sees people coming out of these kind of crude huts, cabins, desperate to get them newspapers and able to talk about not just American politics, but what's going on in Europe. He's flabbergasted.
At this point, the mail in the U.S. was mostly about sending and receiving newspapers. People didn't really send letters because they couldn't afford to.
They kept the rates for letters high, and they used that revenue from letters to pay for the delivery of newspapers to all Americans everywhere. Most people got like fewer than one letter a year. You get a letter saying, Pa has died, or you get like Aunt Letitia's will.
And unlike today, when the person sending the letter covers the cost of postage, back then, the recipient had to pay. You go to the post office, you'd stand in line, see if you had mail, and then pay for it if you wanted it.
It created this fantastic backlog of unclaimed mail because so many people didn't want to pay.
In the 1840s and 50s, the population of the country exploded with new immigrants, and all these new people wanted a less expensive way to communicate. A movement for cheap postage started to form. This movement wanted people to be able to send letters anywhere in the U.S. for one low price using a new tool, the prepaid postage stamp.
They argued that the volume of the mail would increase to a degree that would make up for the revenue, and they were correct, because the volume of the mail really went gangbusters after cheap postage.
The postage stamp allowed regular people to send letters. People sent enough letters to fill thousands of Ken Burns documentaries. It was the Victorian era, and letter writing became an art form. There were even books with advice on how to refine your letter writing style.
Address your correspondent by his or her title, not the first name. Dear husband, beloved brother, dearest friend, honored sir. No matter how close you are, don't address him by his first name. Begin your letter with, I take pen in hand. Please pardon the poor paper, the scratchy pen, the ungraceful language.
Women especially became active letter writers.
Women actually started wearing little lockets around their necks with their stamps inside.
With more women using the post office, the place itself began to change. Post offices historically had been often in the backs of taverns. They were men's social spaces.
There were prostitutes at the post office plying their wares and famously pickpockets.
When women started sending letters, post offices added special ladies' windows so that ladies could pick up their letters without coming into contact with these unseemly elements. Slowly, post offices transitioned into more professional spaces. By 1860, there were some 28,000 post offices in the U.S. People were sending thousands of letters and newly invented greeting cards to each other. But they were also using the post just like the founders intended, to disseminate political information. Abolitionists, for example, were using the mail to spread ideas about Indian slavery. In the 1860s, when the Civil War was being fought over some of those very ideas, the American post office would bifurcate for a time. No mail would be sent between North and South. And the Civil War brought another big change in America's postal system: home delivery.
A postal employee in Ohio named Joseph Briggs found it heartbreaking during the war because people desperate for news of their soldiers away would have to stand in long lines at the post office.
Often these people would be receiving news of a loved one's death.
And there were just scenes of terrible grief in public. They didn't even have privacy. And he found it so heartbreaking that he ran this pilot program of bringing people the mail.
Home delivery caught on, and By the mid-1860s, many cities were offering it. About 30 years later, people living in rural areas would also get home delivery. But while people in the eastern United States entered a letter-writing boom, new settlers in California felt isolated. It was hard to receive mail on the West Coast.
So the mail could go by train to Missouri, but then it had to be hauled by stagecoaches through really terrible conditions.
The other option would be to send a letter on a 13,000-mile, 6-month trip around the tip of South America by boat.
Californians, as they became more powerful by the gold rush era and the succeeding years, became outraged by the fact that they had this lousy postal service, and they demanded to have a reliable stagecoach mail that would depart and arrive on predictable times.
Eventually, they got what they wanted. By 1857, the post office had a fairly reliable route from east to west. It took 25 days, which was better than it had been. It was still not great. A group of businessmen led by a guy named William Russell thought they could do better than the U.S. Post. Russell thought his little startup company could get the mail from St. Joseph, Missouri to Sacramento, California in just 10 days.
In fact, he did it. People didn't think he'd be able to do it.
Russell's competing service was called the Pony Express. Riders on horseback would race at full speed for about 2 miles to relay stations, where they would trade out for a rested horse. This change was supposed to take only 2 minutes. Horses were to carry no more than 165 pounds, including the rider. If an exhausted horse collapsed on the trail, the rider was to run on foot to the next location with the bag of mail. It was a very expensive endeavor, and it didn't last long, about a year and a half. Which was okay, because by 1861, the transcontinental telegraph would reach California, and rail service would soon follow. Trains would eventually deliver mail all over the U.S., and not just deliver it, and become moving post offices. In fact, subsidies from the post office allowed the rail system to expand throughout the country. Trains couldn't afford to run on passenger fare alone. The money they got from the post office was crucial in helping them expand service. Years earlier, these postal subsidies had done the same thing for stagecoaches, and after World War I, the post would do this again for aviation. Planes were not a viable form of transportation until the post office poured money into the industry.
The aviation industry wasn't able to pay for itself with passenger service until well into the 1940s.
The industry survived and expanded by carrying mail to the post office. In fact, before Charles Lindbergh made his historic non-stop flight across the Atlantic, he had another job.
Charles Lindbergh was a night pilot. Now he carried the mail.
If the post office truly grew in America, and I think Woodford Gallup is a pretty good case that it did, it's now playing a more supportive role. In the last 40 years or so, Congress has cut back considerably on services. But if you've noticed longer lines at the post office and delays in receiving your mail, that's why.
In my opinion, no one should be mad at the post office. They should be mad at Congress. Congress has prevented the post office from modernizing and running itself efficiently and tragically going digital, which it should have done back in the 80s.
Elliot believes the post office is an opportunity to facilitate email and other digital communication, but she argues the U.S. Postal Service probably isn't on the brink of death either. Conservatives talk about privatizing the whole operation, but right now, Gallagher doubts that this is possible.
Actually, the private competitors, neither FedEx or UPS is equipped to handle the volume of American mail. They would certainly risk bankruptcy if they tried.
The post office has an unparalleled delivery infrastructure and employs an enormous workforce. And we still need the service they provide. FedEx and UPS. The U.S. Post Office cannot pick and choose where they deliver based on profit. It is obliged by law to provide pickups and deliveries to every even if that is Bring snacks from Whole Foods Market. Select chicken chips, primal corn, bento dip, buffalo sauce, beef jerky, cheese, pickles, or salted nuts. Grab football-ready sides that are already prepared, like mac and cheese, potato salad, or sushi. Anything goes. Nothing is off sides. Nobody does prepared foods like Whole Foods. They have saved my baby. Squarespace is the all-in-one platform for building your brand and growing your business online. Stand out with a beautiful website, engage with your audience, and sell anything. Your products, content you create, and even your time. With member areas, you can unlock a new revenue stream for your business and free up time in your schedule by selling access to creative content, videos, online courses, or newsletters. This summer, share your adventures with your followers in a newsletter, or maybe make some fun video compilations of all your summer escapades. Now you can create pro-level videos effortlessly in the Squarespace Video Studio app. You can easily display posts from your social profiles on your website, or share your new blogs or videos on social media, automatically push website content to your favorite channels so your followers can share it too. Plus, use Squarespace's insights to grow your business. Learn where your site visits and sales are coming from and analyze which channels are most effective. Go to squarespace.com/invisible for a free trial, and when you're ready to launch, use the offer code INVISIBLE to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. You can find the show and join discussions about the show on Facebook. You can tweet at me at Roman Mars and the show at 99PI. We're on Instagram until shit made of ice and wood instead of steel.
Apple Card is the perfect credit card for every purchase. It has cashback rewards unlike others. You earn unlimited daily cashback on every purchase. Receive it daily and can grow it at 4.15% annual percentage yield when you open a high-yield savings account. Apply for Apple Card in the Wallet app on iPhone and start earning and growing your daily cash with savings today. Apple Card subject to credit approval. Savings is available to Apple Card owners subject to eligibility requirements. Savings account provided by Goldman Sachs Bank USA. Member FDIC. Terms apply.
Every kid learns differently, so it's really important that your children have the educational support that they need to help them keep up and excel. If your child needs homework help, check out IXL, the online learning platform for kids. IXL covers math, language arts, science, and social studies through interactive practice problems from pre-K to 12th grade. As kids practice, awards, with the school year ramping up to the best time to get an extra. Our listeners can get 50% off IXL courses today.
We'll see how this one goes. I'm going to start small with some eponymous items you're probably all familiar with. You might be holding one right now, the Bic and the Biro. I chose these for the first eponyms attempt because I thought they're in the spirit of both Roman's show 99% Invisible, which examines a lot of commonplace objects, and of this one, because this is a show about words, and what is stationary without words, and words without stationary. Stationary is the physical infrastructure of words. That is James Ford, author of Adventures in Stationery, A Journey Through His Pencil Case. So James knows a lot about ballpoint pens, which we might casually refer to as biros or bits, because what's kind of interesting is that philosophy just
if all you have is a bit of stick and a clay tablet, you can only produce quite basic scripts like cuneiform, quite angry. But then if you start using like a virus, then you're able to produce extremely useful, like illustrated text or illuminated text. And so with those developments, it means that the characters that you're able to produce are more easy to distinguish, so you're able to have more characters, and so you're able to produce writing, which is more complex, I suppose.
My school would only let us use fountain pens. We were not allowed to write with ballpoints. And this seems to have been quite a common attitude towards ballpoints for a long time. The fountain pen can produce thick lines, thin lines, flourishes, and thus invest your handwriting with a lot of character and flair. But the ball in the ballpoint produces a line of uniform thickness. So a lot of people believed that the pens were detrimental to handwriting.
That's my daughter. She said her father responds to these complaints. And he used to hear people say that ballpoint was ruining their writing skills. And he'd smile and say, well, writing comes from the heart. We can help the hand perform the task. What is so wrong with that? And I think there's nothing wrong with that. Other than Tesla Biro.
I think it's interesting that their names are on products that are really successful.
Yeah, and also they are kind of disposable. That you can know what a big is, or you can know what a biro is, but you don't need to know who Marcel is or who Laszlo is. So they've kind of made this disposable contribution to history, and in the same way they've made themselves disposable.
So if your eponymous product is successful, your involvement in it, and even your own identity, is subsumed, which might not sit that well with the kind of people who put their names on things, because calling something after yourself seems like quite an egomaniacal choice to me.
I mean, I may be wrong, but my impression is a lot of eponyms are not the person naming them after themselves. It's more than a sign by a person.
It's like a mark of respect.
Yeah.
Do you think that people who've got a disease or horrible medical condition named after them, that's quite a sad way to be remembered, isn't it?
I don't know. It depends, because if you're a researcher, you have probably gotten past the feeling of grossness around disease, and you probably got the joy of that you were instrumental in its discovery or success. I have a feeling that I could even live with a horrible disease.
Yeah, but then you have people who only remembered you because you're what killed their grandma.
Locally.
And now part 2 of the illusionist eponym saga, where we learn some bad news about eponyms.
There's a shift, a gradual shift away from using eponyms in medicine.
Okay, there's enemy of eponyms.
My name's Isaac Siemens, and I'm a resident physician in the Department of Family and Community Medicine at the University of Toronto. There's 2 camps in medicine currently, people who want to use eponyms and people who want to move away from eponyms, and there's moving towards kind of accuracy in language in broad strokes. That's the controversy.
You can see the practical case for this shift. Medical workers have to stay abreast of an awful lot of terminology. You try memorizing a load of surnames and which ailment each one represents.
A list of diseases with somebody's last name as the title gives you no information, and you can kind of get bungled up. Whereas you can kind of fake your way through, if you will, if the name of the disease says something about the disease itself.
To use an example that was all over the news when I was growing up, CJD, Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease. The name alone doesn't tell you much about what it is, unless you're familiar with the early 20th century work of the German neurologists Hans Gerhard Kreutzler and Alfons Maria Jakob. The eponym is also not easy to spell. At the far end of the scale, tabloids call the condition the human form of mad cow disease, a rather cartoonish term for a brutal and incurable illness. So the other option is the scientific term. CJD is a form of transmissible spongiform encephalitis. Encephalitis from the medical Latin encephalon, and the ancient Greek encephalos, meaning brain. The itis subject denotes inflammation.
Spongiform encephalitis, to me that would be easier because that tells you something about, I mean, although it's Latin, it gives you a bit of information, so you could kind of piece it together if you had to.
Yeah, or spongy.
Yeah, it turns your brain into a sponge, essentially, so it's all there.
If anything, that's more literal than a lot of disease names would be.
Yeah, I think so.
Perhaps when you're receiving a diagnosis, there's some psychological protection from the grim reality of what's happening in your body, being somewhat disguised by science being called the opaqueness of an eponym. On the other hand, an overly academic or incomprehensible description of the condition can amplify a patient's stress and fear.
One protective nature of different professions, and I think it's similar to law or engineering maybe, where, you know, in order to protect our jobs and to seem like we have some sort of power over the people we work with, we kind of make things possibly more difficult to understand than they need to be, and we use a jargon and a language that needs to be taught to be understood. So I don't know if there's some sort of like unconscious protectionism of our practice involved with naming of diseases, and like, because even the non-eponym names are very like complicated and don't mean a lot to people.
It's quite a common thing in language, like the Bible using quite lofty sounding language so that you maintain that division of status. But I just wonder whether there's a decent middle ground in medicine between wibbly wobbly heart disease and a long complicated name.
You don't want it so simple that you sound kind of stupid or like you don't know what's going on when you say it, I guess. But it's also, in medicine as in everything, communication is so important, and so you want to strike that middle ground where you're making sense to the person who it's most important to, which is the patient.
So in some circumstances, it's better to use the eponym because it might be more familiar.
We learn about trisomy 21, which is a genetic disorder that we're encouraged to speak about, referring to the actual genetic issue, whereas Down syndrome is the common eponym. I think the lay public as well are more familiar with that language.
Some concepts are really hard to describe without the eponym, and with an eponym, much more memorable.
With the Heimlich maneuver, be something that people knew if it wasn't attached to a name, like Heimlich, you know? No, I don't think so.
Would it have made the news in May of this year when 96-year-old Dr. Henry Heimlich himself saved a woman from choking on a piece of hamburger meat by using the maneuver that bears his name?
So I still like them in these ways that they help tell an interesting story. But I totally get when I'm not so tied to my worldview or nostalgia that I cannot accept that it was better another way.
Well, good, because there are certainly some aspects to eponyms that I don't think you'd like very much.
A lot of the argument against eponyms is that it's sort of a simplification of complex stories where generally a white dead male will get the eponym, but if you look at the process of discovering and categorizing diseases, it's often over the course of more than a lifetime, and it involves many, many people, and it's sort of a false history to just use this name. And then there are like ridiculous extremes where there's like four or five people that all have a similar form of the disease named after them, and then later on they discover that it was the same disease the whole time, and then it gets all messed up. Like, I have one of them written down because I could never remember it, but I think it's the longest eponym that I've come across, and it's a four-barreled name, if you will, and it's Mayer-Rokitansky-Kuster-Hauser syndrome.
Mayer-Rokitansky-Kuster-Hauser syndrome is congenital abnormalities in or absence of the uterus and vagina.
It sounds like four people all had some sort of claim to the discovery of the disease.
In reality, there were far more than four. People have been writing about the condition all the way back as far as the Custer was born 92 years before the birth of Hauser, who went on to name the disease Mary Custer syndrome when Elk hunted Hauser to the end.
You don't hear that disease name a lot, but I feel like every time I hear it, the order is a little different, so I don't even know if there's like a standardized name order to it.
Maybe they shuffle it so that everyone gets a turn at the front.
Yeah, they take turns.
The problem with quite a lot of evidence is the person named therein.
Reiter syndrome is a condition where you get joint pain related to a kind of systemic inflammation, and it's named after Hans Reiter, who was the famous Nazi war criminal who did terrible experiments on invasive camels.
Hans Reiter discovered the eponymous syndrome in 1916 when he treated a soldier during the First World War prior to his Nazi affiliation, of which the American rheumatologist Dr. Ephraim Engelman was unaware when he coined the epidemic in 1942. But he later joined the campaign, which began in 1977, to replace the epidemic with a name that doesn't honor somebody associated with war crimes and mass murder. If you don't want to evoke Hans Reiter, you can call this condition reactive arthritis. But while usage of the eponymous term has decreased, it is still being used in medical schools and in journals. The debate rages on. Do you pick and choose which parts of history are marked? Or do you allow a person's scientific achievements to be honoured despite whatever other things they did? Controversial things.
There's even more controversy about eponyms where there's like a sub-conflict, if you will, going on about whether to use the possessive or not in eponyms. So there's even within people that use eponyms or don't, the people that use eponyms are having debates about whether it should be Downs, apostrophe S for possessive, or Down syndrome. And there's research about like which should be used in medical journals to simplify searches so that you don't have to search both terms.
I think that's the one thing I would simplify. I would get rid of all apostrophes.
Wow.
That seems like the right solution.
Caesar salad. It's not Caesar's salad. Caesar knows.
But yeah, the apostrophes, it messes us up a little too much. And you shouldn't have to think there's already something.
Yeah, you need to worry about that horrible disease you've got.
Over 1,000 planets while unraveling human beings' greatest mystery. For all, into the story.
www.starfieldgate.com to learn more and
This is my planet. These are some of my planets.
The falling leaves and chill in the air can only mean one thing. Football is back. Old West Market has got everything you need for a delicious tailgate or watch party. Level up weekday hosting with animal welfare certified meat. We're talking granite chicken wings, organic chicken sausages, hot dogs, and you want to step it up. Catering makes tailgates a breeze. Explore the Old West Market catering menu at shop.wfm.com. Don't sleep on the build your own taco bar. I mean, you should have been placed in the taco bar. I'd just be so sick. If you're heading over to a friend's house, bring snacks at the Old West Market like oyster lunch, tortilla chips, queso dip, or buffalo sauce, cheese, pickles, or something else. Grab football-ready sides that are already prepared, like mac and cheese, potato salad, sushi, anything goes. Nothing is off limits. Nobody does prepare foods like Whole Foods. They have saved my bacon on numerous occasions. Elevate bacon at Whole Foods Market. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. You ever find that just as you start to fall asleep, your brain suddenly won't stop talking, your thoughts just racing around? I call this just going to bed. It basically happens every night. It turns out one great way to make those racing thoughts go away is to talk them through. Therapy gives you a place to do that, so you can get out of your negative thought cycles and find some mental and emotional peace. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. If entirely convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire and match with a licensed therapist. Switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Get a break from your thoughts with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/invisible today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp. HELP.com/invisible. By the show, able discussions about the show on Facebook. Tweet at me at Roman Mars at 99PI or on Instagram on Tumblr too. If you want to read about seed bullets for guerrilla gardening or a rave hero book, you have to go to 99PI. Apple Card is the perfect credit card for every purchase. It has cash back rewards unlike others. You earn unlimited daily cash back on every purchase. Receive it daily and can grow it at 4.15% annual percentage yield when you open a high-yield savings account. Apply for Apple Card in the Wallet app on iPhone and start earning and growing your daily cash with savings today. Apple Card subject to credit approval. Savings is available to Apple Card owners subject to eligibility requirements. Savings account provided by Goldman Sachs Bank USA. Member FDIC. Terms apply. Every kid learns differently, so it's really important that your children have the educational support that they need to help them keep up and excel. If your child needs homework help, check out IXL, the online learning platform for kids. IXL covers math, language arts, science, and social studies through interactive practice problems from pre-K to 12th grade. As kids practice, they get positive feedback and even awards. With the school year ramping up, now is the best time to get IXL. Our listeners can get an exclusive 20% off IXL membership when they sign up today at IXL.com/invisible. That's the letters IXL.com/invisible. Squarespace is the all-in-one platform for building your brand and growing your business online. Stand out with a website you can engage with your audience instantly. Products and content you create for anything you're talking. You can easily display posts from your social profiles on your website or share new blogs or videos to social media. Automatically push website content to your favorite channels to your followers and share it there. Go to squarespace.com/invisible for a free trial, and when you're ready to launch, use the offer code INVISIBLE to save 10% off your first purchase to a website or domain. This is 99% Invisible. I'm Roman Mars.
He's Roman Mars.
If I ask you to think of the most famous architect in American history, if you don't think you know anything at all about architecture, I bet you can take a guess. And I bet your guess would be right.
Frank Lloyd Wright. Frank Lloyd Wright, perhaps the greatest architect of the 20th century. The genius with a T-square has been called the epicenter of modern-day architecture. One of the most extraordinary men of our time.
He has literally established the pace for innovation and new ideas in the field of architecture.
Frank Lloyd Wright left a legacy of some of the most iconic and gorgeous buildings in the United States. like the spiraling Guggenheim Museum in New
Have you
York,
been
and the
high?
Water House in Pennsylvania, which straddles a waterfall, and the futuristic Marin Civic Center, which is the backdrop for Gattaca, which is an awesome movie.
And that is producer Avery Truffle.
By the end of his career, Wright was on a level of celebrity usually reserved for actors and rock stars. He was a household name, and he was on late-night talk shows.
Some quarters have pronounced Wright as an impractical visionary and a pompous windbag.
Yeah.
Right? Particularly? No problem. Not a bit.
He's deceased.
So Wright wasn't just known for being a genius architect. He made headlines because he was a character. He often wore this outfit that included a flowy cape and a hat and cane. He wrote manifestos, launched insults at other architects, and loudly critiqued politicians, religion, and society. He declared himself the greatest architect who ever lived. He was unashamed.
In the early life, I had to choose between honest arrogance and hypocritical humility. I chose honest arrogance and see no occasion to change now.
And Frank Lloyd Wright had this wildly scandalous private life.
There were suits against him, property seized, jail, finally divorce. The raw material for big, spicy headlines. Frank Lloyd Wright was the darling of the sensational press.
But this bombastic character ultimately changed the field of architecture and introduced a new philosophy of building.
Before many of Wright's iconic and famous structures were completed, before Falling Water, before the Guggenheim, before the Marin Civic Center, his most significant contribution to our everyday lives was something much more modest. A small, sturdy, inexpensive, and most importantly, very beautiful house designed with the American working class in mind. And it all started with a journalist from Milwaukee.
In 1934, a Milwaukee Journal reporter named Herbert Jacobs was assigned to take a drive over to Spring Green in central Wisconsin. He was told to write about Taliesin, Frank Lloyd Wright's home and school.
Jacob didn't really know anything about architecture, and at that particular time, he wasn't really interested in learning anything about it.
Because Herbert Jacobs had other things on his mind. In that November of 1934, his wife was very, very pregnant. The night before his reporting trip, he brought her to the hospital. He stayed up with her until dawn. The nurses assured Herbert that he could go on his reporting trip without missing the birth. So he set out that morning alone, teary-eyed, completely unprepared.
He drove 120 miles through the chill, gray Wisconsin countryside for his assignment. To me, Frank Lloyd Wright.
Wright, who was 67 in 1934, couldn't have cared less about his appointment with Herbert Jacobs in the Milwaukee Journal. Actually, Wright forgot all about it, which wasn't unusual. He was known to blow off journalists.
When Jacobs arrived at Frank Lloyd Wright's compound, completely distracted by thoughts of his wife and their baby, he learned that the architect was actually on his way out the door. They got to talk for just over 10 minutes before Wright left abruptly, saying, "Some of the boys will talk to you now."
The boys were Frank Lloyd Wright's apprentices. They had come to him from all over the world, and they were part of a fellowship program that Wright established at his home studio, a campus he called Taliesin.
Taliesin, a Wilkesburg meaning shining crown.
But this also has the complex building.
So Taliesin actually is built kind of on the brow, just like your brow of your head.
The main Taliesin building curled around the side of the hill, almost like a crown.
He felt that you should never build on top of a hill because that destroyed the integrity of the hill.
This is Floyd Hammond, architect of Taliesin.
Also, part of the faculty of the Frank Lloyd Wright School of Architecture, and I've been here since starting as an apprentice back in 1987.
Campbell works and lives in Taliesin full time. Here on the Frank Lloyd Wright family land, where Wright used to play.
So yeah, where now?
So where are we? We are, this is just outside Spring Green, Wisconsin. It's a very beautiful green valley with rolling hills. So he spent a lot of his summers working this land, so he was very familiar with the landscape.
This connection with the outdoors was extremely formative for Wright. He thought that architecture should help people live harmoniously with their environment, rather than shield them from it. The house could become part of nature. It was made with local materials and had Taliesin Fellowship?
The fellowship was the thing that the Milwaukee Journal wanted Herbert Jacobs to cover in his article. When Jacobs drove into Taliesin that morning in 1934, the fellowship had been going on for 2 years, and it was hard for the public to wrap their minds around it, including this NBC browser.
The Taliesin Fellowship. Just what is it? A school and yet not a school. A colony of devoted men and women. A principality whose king is Frank Lloyd Wright. Apprentices they're called, not students. Theirs, as Mr. Wright has the fingers of my hand.
The apprentices had to pay $1,100 a year to attend the Taliesin Fellowship, nearly 20 grand a day, and it wasn't like an accredited institution or anything. Students had to do a lot of grunt work, baling hay, plowing fields, and making meals, but they got to learn Frank Lloyd Wright's philosophy of architecture and live with them and work with them, even though oftentimes this meant serving as an unpaid labor force.
When Jacobs was getting his tour of Taliesin, he described the apprentices as rather long-haired, smiling, and polite young men who tried their best to explain to him what organic architecture means.
Organic architecture is architecture of its time and of its place. You're not trying to make it look like something that it's not.
Wright thought that there should be no wallpaper to cover things up. No paint, no plaster. Wood should look like wood. Stone should look like stone. Concrete should look like concrete.
When Frank Lloyd Wright worked with plywood, he liked to leave the edge of the plywood exposed so that you saw those layers in there, and it became part of the almost ornament or detail.
Different from really traditional European-style architecture, with Rococo gold ornaments and cloth chairs and parlors full of knickknacks. Just think of Victorian houses stuffed with lots of tiny rooms, covered with bright paint and lacy curtains.
This idea of organic architecture wasn't just a break from these traditions. It was a break from new trends in modern architecture too. Cities all over the world were building huge, boxy glass and steel structures designed to be hyper-sleek machines for living and working. Wright explains that these were simply not comfortable for human animals.
They are like goldfish in a globe. And these houses that are so classified as they now are, they're not sensible. It's an abuse of privilege and an abuse of material.
Frank Lloyd Wright took the traditional old materials and put them into sleek, modern forms. Organic architecture was a new style, born in the United States.
Organic architecture, a new sense of what constitutes humanity under harmonious conditions. A harmonious place in which to live, a harmonious way to live in it.
But Frank Lloyd Wright didn't explain this grand philosophy to the journalist, Herbert Jacobs, because Wright wasn't there. The apprentices did the best they could, but again, Jacobs was very distracted and was only thinking of his wife in the hospital. He thanked the two young men who showed him around Taliesin and got back in his car.
Jacobs later wrote, finally, he started back to Milwaukee, learning on the way from the hospital that I had become a father at about 11 o'clock that morning, at the very moment when I was interviewing Wright.
Herbert Jacobs, his wife Catherine, and their new daughter lived in Milwaukee for 2 more years on his reporter's salary of $20 a week.
This was in the mid-30s, the Great Depression. So when Herbert Jacobs was offered a slightly higher paying job at a paper in the state capital of Madison, the family moved right away.
When we got to Madison, I couldn't find anything that within our price range, in a newspaperman's price range, that was what we figured would be nice to live in.
This is the voice of Herbert Jacobs himself from 1956 NBC interview. When he and Catherine moved to Madison, they didn't see any houses they liked, or that they could afford.
So a cousin of my wife's had been out to Taliesin with Mr. Wright and suggested that we have Mr. Wright do something for us.
Jacobs didn't really remember much about his first visit to Taliesin 2 years before, and he murmured something along the lines of, very interesting, which his wife's cousin took as a yes.
But he made an appointment for us to go out there, and we went along with that idea. Then, on the way out, my wife and I were trying to think, what is it that we can tell this great man, the architect of rich plants, what can we say to him that would interest him in ours, a very small case?
In the past, when Frank Lloyd Wright had designed private homes, they had not been for people like Herbert and Catherine Jacobs. Wright had designed gorgeous, wide homes, broad roofs, and expansive living rooms for wealthy people. His construction masterpieces. They were works of art. They were expensive.
So we put it as a sort of challenge. What the country needs is a decent $5,000 house. Can you build one?
In today's money, $5,000 is about $85,000. That's a pretty reasonably priced house in most real estate markets.
That's right. So listen, you were the first client that ever asked him to build a low-cost house. He said for 20 years he's been wanting to build one, but no one ever asked him to.
Now, Wright had long wanted to make a more democratic form of housing, even early in his career. He had been playing around with inexpensive methods of building and other structures, and he had a lot of concepts that he had been spewing around urban planning.
But now, Wright had the chance to make some of his concepts a reality. He had the willing clients, and he had time on his hands. In 1936, he was in a bit of a slump in his career. People couldn't afford fancy big new homes. Again, it was the Depression, and a number of big projects had been canceled, and also, Wright had already been practicing for decades, and he was slowly getting written off as a has-been.
And then in comes this young, open-minded couple. Wright could tell them his philosophy and teach them how to live well through good architecture.
Then he said, do you really want a $5,000 house? He said, most people want a $10,000 house for $5,000. Are you willing to give up the things that you have to give up?
Mr. Wright made a list of the things that the Jacobs would have to do without. They really wanted a $5,000 house.
Tile bathrooms, extra trim, finish, and things like that. Are you willing to give those up? We didn't know anything about it. We said, sure, it's okay with us.
Herbert and Catherine Jacobs didn't know it at the time, but that modest little house that Frank Lloyd Wright was to build for them would be the most practical expression of his ideology.
The Jacobs would own the first house in a movement that Wright called Usonia.
The house that Herbert Jacobs built was the first of the Usonian houses. Usonians, a right word meaning the United States as it ought to be at its democratic zenith.
Usonia was Frank Lloyd Wright's name for the United States of North America. In Wright's vision, Usonia would be a country with modest, well-made, beautiful, comfortable little houses that the working class could afford. These Usonian homes would inspire, educate, and, Wright believed, create a new culture for all Americans.
I believe now people are going to know what constitutes good architecture, and of course good living has to go with it. Good conduct also. Good dressing too, because you wouldn't dress in a loud and vulgar way in a quiet and beautiful room. All these good things are dependent more or less one on the other, add up to something that we call culture. It's only by a natural growth that you can attain culture.
Wright believed the way to build a better American culture was not en masse, not in apartment buildings or cookie-cutter developments. They catered to the individual.
Culture is not for the crowd. Culture is an individual thing. And that's what our forefathers struck when they declared that the individual is sovereign.
Which, to Frank Lloyd Wright, meant that the masses should be unmasked. They should spread out away from the city.
Well, the city, of course, is a thing of the past. There was a time during the Middle Ages when there was the only source of culture. There was no way of acquiring this thing we call culture except by direct contact.
But for Wright, that wasn't true anymore. People were connected to culture through radio and telephones and automobiles.
They had transportation, speed, listening. This you're getting now is no longer essential for people to crowd together anyway.
These were all parts of Frank Lloyd Wright's vision for America, and this would start to become reality in 1946. The Jacobs House would come to be known as Jacobs 1, or Usonia 1.
Jacobs House was one of the first ones built. This was just a wide open farmland from the school out here.
This is Bill Martinelli, manager of Usonia 1. It's in a suburban street outside of Madison, now lined with little suburban houses. But Usonia 1 really stands out, even if you don't know what it is if you're just driving by, because from the street, it almost just looks like a beautiful wooden wall. The house is back up.
Get a bag, door on back, back, well, some band.
house should be built for residents, not on land.
Also, from the street, you can see that there's no garage. The car is parked under a wooden awning, a little flat roof with no sidewalk. This is the carport, a term that Frank Lloyd Wright coined.
Carport was the most considered the first named carport. That was a term that Wright came up with.
This was one of the many tiny ways Wright kept costs down. And also, the carport was an education in lifestyle. Without a garage, the judges wouldn't have space to store their junk. They'd have to simply minimize their possessions and toss what they didn't need. But the carport isn't purely utilitarian. The woodwork of the carport roof has this lovely geometric pattern.
Yeah. Funny, when I heard about the carport, I didn't expect it to be so beautiful and like really nice.
In the house, the more you look around, the more you see, with the ceiling of the carport, you wouldn't expect that.
Utility of one is full of small,
Sure. Warm in here.
Oh wow.
See all the sun. You're right, I think it's drawing in.
lot more families had that same sort of thing happen.
Mr. Wright thought so too.
He thought everybody should live in a house designed by him. You know, dishes and clothes designed by him and all the furniture.
He did design a lot of his furniture. And in at least one case, he did. This was all about
Frank Lloyd Wright wanted to redesign it. By that token, Americans. Good design, he thought, made a kinder, more
This is
beautiful,
nice.
more living country.
Nowadays, Houstonian houses may be seen perfectly well. You don't need a giant building.
By 1939, Wright had built Houstonian homes all over the country, including houses in Alabama, California, Illinois, Michigan, and Virginia. But he wanted to build more.
We wanted a central factory that made prefabricated Houstonian parts modifiable for each client depending on their needs for space and site conditions.
Originally, the whole idea was all these walls would be manufactured in a factory. That never really happened. This was all plate built.
Frank Lloyd Wright's factory for Houstonian homes never came to pass. And between scraping the year to write, Frank's $5,000 price tag for Houstonian homes wasn't feasible after the Depression.
Also, Wright's career picked up shortly after Houstonian. He started building bigger containers, the ones we all know him for, like Falling Water.
Among the Wright houses, none has been more widely publicized than the Pennsylvania home of Hector Chopper, which straddles the waterfall.
Wright worked on Houstonian homes up until near the very end of his life. But it was a group of his apprentices that would carry on his vision by building an entire community of Houstonian houses.
Turn right on Houstonian Road.
Next time on 99% Invisible, a trip to Houstonian, New York, to see what became of Frank Lloyd Wright's vision and why these little houses in Texas still get through there. 99% Invisible was produced this week by Avery Copeland, Miss Reed, Delaney Hall, and the Fitzgerald and Greenspan and the Norman Morris. Katie Mingle is our senior editor. Kurt Polstead is our digital director. Sean Rial composed all original music for the episode. And Karen John and Betty Moon, John Eichler, Jim Sharp, Sam Sharp, Christine Ingram, and Jody LeBoy. We are a project of 91.7 people, and music tips that join us for free on Radio Row in Beautiful, downtown,
This is how it's stuff that is symbolic on that often.
Embark on a epic journey through the story from Bethesda Game Studios' first new universe in over 25 years. In this next generation role-playing game, you decide who you are and what you will become. The most important story is the one you will tell. Captain your own ship and use that on over 1,000 planets while unraveling the nation's greatest mystery. For all, into the stars. Visit www.starfieldgame.com to learn more.
10 people.
house was over 20 grand. But the members of Usonia would not be deterred.
They were determined to go forward with this. They were very optimistic. People would come occasionally to see these homes under construction and come to see insania. The Romans and my signed up for the community. They thought they were looking to Italian congratulations to the town, not to the city itself. They were dreaming of such a question like that. Really. Who was perfect?
But Frank Lloyd Wright here at East Pass wanted to find a way to come. They met up in New York, and they exchanged letters and ideas about the ground, and Roland went out to sea like Kayaking.
He was a real person with a social, with a strange joke, and people don't see him that way. But I don't know what.
Roland was 26. Wright was 83.
Come on, Roland, sit down. You're my client. I'm your architect. I'll redesign your house as many times as I have to until I've satisfied all of your needs. You have to speak up if you don't protect it. Roland's house will be one of 3 in Usonia, New York that Frank Lloyd Wright designed himself. About 5 years after the rising from Den, when Roland was just a kid, Frank Lloyd Wright added an extension to the house.
In fact, Roland is the last living owner of a Frank Lloyd Wright Usonian home, built especially for him. And he still lives in it.
I came to realize, after some years living here, there's not been a day in my life that I didn't see something beautiful. Even the terrible days that occurred every night.
The house is completely Usonian, with simple carport, sumptuous wooden walls that almost glow, and one big main room and a tiny kitchen. It almost feels like you're outside, because it has these big glass windows with long roof overhangs that draw the eye out towards the thick forest of trees just outside.
I think that it has had an effect on me in many ways. Your scientists say that kind of sense reduces stress, good for your emotional health. And it's really good for physical health too. I'm 92 years old. I'm pretty good shape for that too. And I attribute that partly, who knows. I'd like to attribute that to experience beauty around me for most of my life, which is very hard. Frank Lloyd Wright's idea that better architecture could create a better way of life is entirely true. And then each other, if there's a problem or a need, kids all of the adults by their first name, say that the children growing up here have 50 aunts and uncles in the family. For the first 40 years of Usonia, New York, only 12 of the 48 houses changed hands. 6 of those the next generation. There are only 2 divorces. The joke that they couldn't decide who would get the house.
But life started to move at different paces for people living in Usonia. Suddenly they weren't all young families. They were all young people, different stages.
And by the time pretty much grown up, the first decade,
Any and all new additions have been built in a Usonian style, using local materials, flat roofs, big glass windows, and Wrightian sensibilities. They have to be built that way.
While the outsides are not landmarked, they are governed by the Board of Usonia. The insides are not at all.
This is Evan Kingsley. He's one of the newcomers to Usonia. Relatively. He's been there since 2003.
But I think for the most part, those of us who have chosen to live here are really sensitive to the aesthetic of the interior.
But there's one specific part of the interior that has changed in a lot in Usonian homes.
We've completely redone the kitchen. As was the case in most Usonian homes, the kitchen in Evan's home was this little alcove, very efficient and very, very tiny.
Wright never realized that the whole
Brockway and we gained, I don't know, maybe 10 inches there. That's all that we gained in doing that. There are a smattering of Usonian homes throughout the United States, some designed by Wright and some by his apprentices, but all following the same basic principles. And like Evan Kingsley's home, many of these other Usonian houses are hard to modify, because they're often governed by boards who are trying to preserve them as historic pieces of architecture. And also, the owners themselves want to make sure they keep within the principles of the house.
You have X number of cabinets. You don't have cabinets up at the top. They weren't put there, and if you could add them, you would violate the principles.
There's no Franklin right police who come around and look and see if you change
That's what we joke about, but there isn't.
That's Betty and John Moore. They live in Wisconsin, in a house called Jacobs 2. It's the second Usonian house that Wright designed for that journalist, Herbert Jacobs.
Yeah, well, you want to make sure that you can adapt to the house because it's not going to adapt to you.
You aren't going to change it much.
Like most Usonian homes, Jacobs 2 had a carport, big windows, an open plan, and concrete floors with a heating system in it.
The floor's nice and cool,
But in the winter, you go downstairs in bare feet.
and it's nice and warm.
I mostly wanted to play that clip because I love how Betty and John actually complete each other's sentences.
Betty and John's house needed a lot of attention, which is why it was on the market for 4.5 years before they bought it.
Oh, everybody wanted to look at it. It was a curiosity, but nobody wanted to live here.
And they're really not for everyone. The reason they sit on the market sometimes for so long is because people consider them difficult to live in.
That's John Eichler, an architect in Chicago who has restored a number of Wright houses, including Usonian one.
In order to preserve them, you sometimes have to modify them in order to make them more livable.
But even experts like Eichler have a tough time keeping track of how many Usonian homes exist.
So how many are there?
I don't know. I have no idea.
I've heard numbers ranging from 27 to 140. It all depends on your definition of what an authentic Usonian house is. You could consider Usonia a period in Frank Lloyd Wright's life, a period in American architectural history, which would include the houses by the apprentices, or just a general architectural style. Depending on your definition, the number of Usonian houses continues to grow. In 2013, a new Usonian house was built on the campus of Florida Southern College. It was a design of Wright's from 1939, but constructed 74 years later, all according to Wright's plan and principles.
Usonia certainly never came to pass in the way that Frank Lloyd Wright originally envisioned, with every American living in an affordable custom home. And in fact, elements of the Usonian home have evolved into something else entirely.
So it is kind of true that Usonia directly influenced the development of the ranch home.
Oh, without a doubt. Yes, I think so.
Ranch-style houses are all over the country in nearly every suburb. They are horizontal, flat to the ground, one story. They have an open floor plan with few walls. So it's not hard to see the similarities to Usonia, although ranch homes are generally less inspired. They don't have the elegant details, and they're made with standard materials.
Wright might not have been pleased the concepts of Usonia got absorbed into essentially the epitome of cookie-cutter suburban housing. But at least these houses really were affordable for the middle class, unlike all the Usonian houses after Usonia 1. After World War II, the American suburbs were full of ranch homes.
There weren't that many variations after the war. And the suburban ranch home was pretty much it. I mean, unless you were living in some humongous mansion or something, everyone was living in, ranch homes in suburbia. It was a very prevalent form of housing.
Frank Lloyd Wright died in 1959 at age 89, 3 years after finishing Roland Risley's house in New York.
He died having created an American style for home building, a way in which natural wood, bricks, and masonry are used in a simple, modifiable way. A way that is cozy, stylish, organic, and honest. His influence was there where you see lots of wood and stone, and where you see big, open floor plans. where homes are oriented to the sun or away from the street, where you see a structure built into a hill instead of on top of it, connected and responding to the landscape.
And yes, whether he would have liked it or not, Frank Lloyd Wright's influence can be found in ranch homes in the suburbs and in the details of all kinds of homes, all around us, in ways Wright never imagined. Usonia lives on. "99% Invisible" was produced this week by Avery Trufelman, Sharif Yusuf, Delaney Hall, Emmett Fitzgerald, Sam Greenspan, and me, Roman Mars. Katie Mingle is our senior editor. Kurt Kolstead is our digital director. Taryn Mazza is our office manager. And Sean Real composed all original music for this episode. Special thanks this week to Jim Sharp, Sam Sharp, Ayal Podell, Josh Podell, Lloyd Trufelman, Allison Chernow, and Jim Dennis. We are Project 91.7 KALW in San Francisco, produced on Radio Row in beautiful downtown Oakland, California. One of the vanguard shows in the Radiotopia Trog is The Heart. It's all about love and intimacy and how those two things intersect with our lives. Right now, they're in the middle of a series about how femininity, that's right, intersects with masculinity. It's called Pansy.
I love the idea of being able to, like, on a hot summer's day, wear a skirt.
If I want to wear a big chunky necklace one day, I will wear it. If I want to paint a nail, I'll do it.
If it were socially acceptable for me to wear eyeliner, I would absolutely wear eyeliner. I just like the way it looks.
Subscribe to The Heart, and you can discover how bold and daring in both subject and form a podcast can be. Find it in all the Radiotopia shows at the new radiotopia.fm. This episode is brought to you by Starfield. Embark on an epic journey through the stars in Bethesda Game Studios' first new universe in over 25 years. In this next-generation role-playing game, you decide who you are and what you will become. The most important story is the one that you tell. Captain your own ship as you venture through the settled systems, exploring over 1,000 planets while unraveling humanity's greatest mystery. For all, into the story.